Hello and welcome to the LLG vlog, your fortnightly roundup of local government law and practice. You're with me, Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor, and as usual, Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance. Great to see you once again, Helen.
Lovely to see you, Dennis, always.
Right, to the business. Towards the end of March saw an absolutely massive deluge of planning proposals and initiatives from the government. The word manic comes to mind. So let's take a refresh. Let's look at what happened. How did this all start? Well, let's go back to the 23rd of March, not that long ago. The government published a public consultation on the New Towns Draft Programme and its environmental implications.
Yeah, and on the same day, government issued a consultation seeking views on two proposals for a requirement for local planning authorities, LPAs, to consult the Secretary of State where they are minded to refuse an application for planning permission. It also seeks views on proposals for LPAs to consult the Secretary of State where they are minded to allow an application.
Important rules,
Onerous.
these in
Mm.
practice. And they then issued an implementation plan which explains the government's target implementation timeline for implementing the Planning and Infrastructure Act 2025. It explains how government plans to implement policies contained in the Act and how applicants and others could use the Act and its measures once they're in place. Now, the secondary legislation on this and the guidance flowing from the Act will support the government's growth and clean energy missions by improving and streamlining the development consent order processes.
Yeah, they've also issued a consultation seeking views around fees. These are new proposals to establish a new, I think it's called a national default fee schedule for planning
Mm,
applications and on the principles of local fee setting.
yeah. Now, 25th of March, this date saw the publication of the final set of emergency measures to boost house building in London. These were given a lot of publicity.
Mm.
There were lots of documents issued. There was a press release, letters from the Secretary of State to councils, house builders, and registered providers. The consultation response on the original package of measures was published. There was a policy note and secondary legislation changing the Mayor of London's call-in powers, which come into effect on the 11th of May this year.
Very, very quick. So, jump ahead a couple of days. We're at the 26th of March now. The government confirmed plans to bring forward a national scheme of delegation for planning decisions in its response to a consultation on the proposals. And this heralds the creation of new style planning committees. And this is what's going to be our focus now as we move forward, I think, Dennis, because they're important to talk about.
Yes, again, a lot of it's in the news everywhere. This in the local government legal media, and the government has confirmed plans, as we say, to bring forward a national scheme of delegation. This is the first, as far as I can remember, and this was the response to its consultation on the original proposals. Writing in the response published on Thursday, the 26th of March, the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government also committed to limiting the size of planning committees to just 13 members.
Well, alongside a national delegation scheme, the consultation also proposed requiring separate, smaller planning committees for strategic development and mandatory training for planning committee members. That's been around a lot in terms of the
Mm.
standards discussions and the code of conduct, anyhow. But in its response, the government said that the national scheme of delegation would ensure that planning committees work, well, to quote them, I think, effectively as possible and focus on those applications for complex or contentious development where local democratic oversight is required.
Yeah, and it added that the two-tier structure is intended to give greater clarity and consistency about who in a local planning authority will make planning decisions.
Mm.
In its consultation, the government proposed a delegation system made up of two tiers, Tier A and Tier B. Now, the consultation said that Tier A applications should generally be technical in nature or about minor developments and would include the following types of applications for officer decision only. Sorry, it's a list, but it's an interesting one. So these are the things that only officers will determine. Applications for planning permission for householder development, minor commercial development, minor residential development. They'll consider applications for reserved matter approvals, applications for a Section 96A non-material amendment to planning permissions. They'll also deal with applications for the approval of conditions, applications for approval of the BNG plan. They'll also deal with applications for approval of prior approval for permitted development rights. They'll deal with applications for lawful development certificates and applications, finally, for a certificate of appropriate alternative development. Now, if you're a planning advisor, you'll know exactly what these involve.
Yeah. And I do remember that these tiers were mooted ages ago, actually, in
Sure.
previous. Um, and if members want to take a look at what LLG said at that time, they can go onto the resource hub where the
Mm.
consultation response is published. But Tier B, let's take a look at Tier B applications. So these are to be decided by committees, should meanwhile involve applications for planning permission. Surprise, surprise, not in Tier A. But notwithstanding, and this is important, notwithstanding Tier A, any application for planning permission where the applicant is the local authority, a councillor or officer, and Section 73 applications to vary conditions and review of mineral planning conditions as well. And in its response, the government reiterated its support for the list of applications included under Type A, but they did introduce a small change in approach to reserved matters applications and said it would move applications for medium residential development to Tier B.
Yes, and Helen, on this it said, we recognise that in some cases that these applications may relate to large-scale phased development taking
Mm.
place over many years. And, quote, as such, each reserved matter application can represent substantial major development in its own right and may, in some cases, merit committee scrutiny. For this reason, only reserved matter applications relating to non-phased outline planning permissions are included in Tier A in the draft regulations. And on medium residential development, the response added, having considered all the points raised by respondents, on balance, we do not think it would be appropriate to include any applications for medium residential development in Tier A. They said, we recognise that in any particular circumstances, this type of application might raise issues which would merit scrutiny by a committee. We will therefore, the government said, put these types of application in Tier B for committees to consider.
Yeah, now turning to planning committee sizes, and I know previously I've been holding roundtables to thrash this out, but the government committed to a maximum cap of 13 members, and it said this would strike the right balance between fair political representation and ensuring resilience in the decision-making function, whilst achieving the policy aims of creating smaller professional committees, I think, are the aim. And the government said it's now prepared draft regulations setting out the detailed arrangements for the national scheme of delegation, and it said published draft. It has published draft statutory guidance to support local authorities in implementing the regulations.
And the government, meanwhile, held back on making a final decision on whether mandatory training for planning committee members should be administered on a national level, stating that it would embark on further stakeholder engagement. Commenting on its overall plans, the ministry said, planning is principally a local activity because decisions about what to build and where should be shaped by local communities and reflect the views of local residents.
And the ministry went on to say that that's why the government is determined to ensure every area has an up-to-date local plan, developed through significant resident engagement, and also why the government believes that planning committees have an integral role in providing local democratic oversight of planning decisions. And we know that when it comes to planning committees, they're taken very seriously, and members in particular do like to be on planning committees. The ministry, however, said it's vital that in exercising democratic oversight, planning committees operate as effectively as possible, focusing on those applications which require member input and not, it said, revisiting the same decision.
Interesting stuff. But just a reminder, Helen, before we go, all these items appeared first in Bulletin 13, published on the 1st of April. But for ease of reference, the relevant postings relating to planning committee changes are repeated in the accompanying bulletin as well, so that you won't miss
Mm.
them. Well, that's all for this episode. We'll see you next time for more legal insights and updates.
Have a good week.